Hey, in this video, I'm going to show you a few ways to easily create and add a pagination component to any page in your app. Pagination is the next previous show X per page feature you see in a lot of websites that display long lists of information. The first method I'm going to show you assumes you can load all your data ahead of time and then use JavaScript to split it into pages. Sometimes that might not be feasible if you have lots of data, so I'll also show you how to do it by making a new API and database call for each page. So in this example app I have up, I pretend to load 405 records when the page loads in. You typically wouldn't show all of them at once and have the user scroll through them like this. Instead, you'd only show like 20 at a time and give the user a way to page through them. To do that, let's make a pager.svelte component file that we can reuse anywhere. On top, we need access to all the rows by taking in a rows variable from props. This will be an array. We also need to send back a single page of rows, so we can add that here as well. And I'm going to call this trimmed rows. And to send it back, we need to make it bindable like this. Then we need to figure the total rows by counting the array with a derived rune. Then a state variable to track how many the user wants to see per page. This will be from a drop-down box. Next, a variable that will know the current page with the count starting at 0. Then another derived rune that figures the total pages by rounding up the row count divided by the per page. When we grab the per page from the select box, the value will be a string, so we got to convert it to a number here. Next, we need to calculate the indexes we're going to cut off the array at, so we figure the start and end indexes. Then we need an effect rune. This will allow us to set the trimmed rows to be the original rows sliced at the start and end position, adding 1 to the end though. Now for the pager UI, I'm going to make a simple flex container first. Here I'm using Tailwind, but you can style yours however you want, of course. In there, we'll have 2 buttons, one for previous page and one for next. When you click on previous, it will take the current page and subtract 1 from itself. And the next page will add 1 to itself when you click it. Then to prevent people from going over, we should disable each button when appropriate. So on the first page or less, the previous button won't be clickable. And the next button will be disabled if we're at or past the total pages minus 1. Next, I'll add the per page dropdown in between them. We bind the value to our per page variable and set some options. Then we also need to reset the current page to 0 when someone changes this. If someone is at page 100 when we're looking at 5 per page, page 100 might not exist if they change it to 25 per page, so it's easier just to reset it than to try to figure that all out. But you can if you want to, of course. Finally, a simple display for the current record range shown and the total records. Start and end are 0 based, so just got to add 1 to each of them. Now to use it, we just go wherever we have a long list of things and the data already and import pager on top or bottom of it. We need to send it rows, which in this page is the list of records. We also need to get back the current page or the trimmed rows. We'll set this to a new variable made from a state rune so that changes are reactive. We also need to change our each loop to only show the trimmed rows instead of all the records. Checking out the page now really quick, there's a few things we need to finish. We needed to bind trimmed rows, so changes to it will flow back to the parent. And I also set the per page's default value to 0 instead of 5 on accident. Now if we try it out, we only see the first 5, and we can quickly page through them like this. We can change the per page, and we start off on page 1 again. When we get to the end, it shows what's left only, and the next is disabled. And of course, previous is disabled when you're on page 1. That's about all for this method. You can reuse the pager component anywhere you need this done. Just style it the way you want, and you're all set. Now let's move on to loading large amounts of data on each page change using an API call. For this one, I have a database preloaded with 30,000 cities in the United States. Sending all 30,000 records might be too slow to load all at once, depending on the info that's coming along with each record. We also restarted with a fresh home page again. In here, we'll set up some variables on top in the script. First, we need a variable to hold our list of records we'll display. It'll be a state variable with the default value of a blank array. Then we need to track what page we're on, and the initial value will be page 1. And a variable to control how many per page. We'll set it to 20 for now, and we aren't going to use the drop-down from before, but you can add it easily if desired. There's a few more we need, but I'll come back to add that in a bit. First, we need a function to get a page. It'll be asynchronous, and in it we'll have a fetch function that will call /API/cities. And at the end of the URL, we'll add a query parameter that is the page number. We don't have that endpoint created yet, but we'll finish this page first. To get the JSON response from the fetch call, we add this line. And then we set the records object to be the JSON records object. We just got to remember to use that records name when we make the endpoint. Now, like we did previously, we can just loop through whatever records we have and in each block and output them. And we also need a way to get the total records and also fetch the first 20 when the page first loads. For the total records, I'm going to have a matching page.server.ts file that'll count the records in the database and return just that number. Doing the count only should be pretty quick in any database. However you do this in your database will differ a lot. I'm using PostgreSQL with a helper function I always have. I do have a video on using PostgreSQL with Svelte that goes over this code, so check it out if you're curious. Back on the page, we can finish up the variables we need now. We need to import data from props now that we have the total records coming in. We also need a variable that will hold the total pages. This will be derived from the total records divided by the per page rounded up. Finally, we need to add an onMount function to call our getPage function the first time to get the initial 20 records. Now we can work on our API endpoint. Let's make an API folder in the routes and a cities folder in there, and a +server.ts file in that folder. This file will contain a get method function, and we'll pull in the page number we sent through the query string with the params parameter. Then we need a variable that will be the database offset. This is where we start grabbing our 20 rows from a database, and this will be the page number times per page, which is 20. Then we can do a SQL query in our database, getting only 20 rows, but starting at our offset. However you do this in your database will differ a lot. But once your database query is done, we should end up with 20 rows, and we just send it back with the name records. Back on the page, the initial load of 20 records works now, and we need to finish our buttons. We can set the onClick of the previous button to subtract 1 from the on page and then call getPage. And do the same for next, but add 1 instead. We'll also disable the buttons when they reach either end, like we did in the first part of the video. And there we go. Each button click calls an API endpoint and queries the database for the next or previous 20 rows. It sends it back, and it gets replaced as the list of records shown. I think that's about it for this video, but if you have any questions, just let me know, and thanks for checking this out.